Hit the recording. So, welcome everybody to our little webinar today. This is our Knowledge Bites webinars, which we do at lunchtime periodically. And they're basically just quick interactive intros to practical sources of training and assistance, as it says, to help you just improve your operation, connect to resources, and move projects forward. So, these are really just a quick hit and designed to help you get some resources you can use. Just if you don't know, if you haven't been to one of these before, it's part of BDCC's Southern Vermont Economy Project, which is run out of BDCC in Brattleboro, but covers all of Southern Vermont, Bennington and Windham counties. And it's funded by the USDA Rural Community Development Initiative and designed to provide technical assistance and training to help support community projects. So with that being said, I'm just going to quickly turn it over to Ash Shepard. So I ran into NTEN's work through taking a webinar that was on this topic, really kind of a deep dive as our organization was thinking about creating policies for AI use and exploring how we might use AI to help us do our jobs better, but then also thinking about ways to be responsible about that. And so I attended some of their content. It was really great. So when I was looking for resources to put together for everyone in our region, I just reached out to NTEN, and Ash was like, absolutely, I will come show you what we have. And so I'll let him tell you a little bit about the organization, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and what they do and how they help nonprofits with making decisions about technology use in general. Take it away, Ash. Thanks for being here.
Excellent. Thanks, Meg. Hello, everybody. My name is Ash Shepard. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Chief Program Officer at NTEN. I'm just going to drop a link in the chat to our organization. So just real quick, we are a nonprofit and we help other nonprofits learn how to use technology in more equitable, efficient, and effective ways. And we do that in a really wide range of capacities. We have a lot of programs, we have a lot of research and reports, we have a lot of tools. I'm definitely going to be going through and showing you some of those today. My understanding for this is it's really meant to be about sort of like some discussion, some engagement. So I don't have formal slides, but I will share my screen because I definitely have a stack of resources that I want to kind of point you to, highlight for you. A good number of them are NTENs and our resources that we have available for folks. But I definitely also have a couple of other resources around AI that I just think are really great resources, and they're free. So I just wanted to point them out to folks. But again, the idea and the hope is that this is really just meant to like be here to answer your questions, right? I imagine you're here because you have some questions, you have some information you're looking for. So definitely want to encourage this to fill discussion. So as we're cruising along, I think you should be able to unmute and just ask your questions, Meg. I'm not sure if that's how the permissions are set here, hopefully.
Yep. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So you can unmute at any time or raise your hand, or it's if you want to come off camera, you can come off camera and unmute and wave your hand and jump in at any time. It's very casual.
Yeah. And then also you can just drop things in the chat. So again, like whatever feels most comfortable for you today, like just happy to have you here and want to make sure that I'm getting you some resources. So I guess just real quick, anybody here, have you interacted? Do you know of NTEN? Have you ever heard of us? You could just drop a quick note in the chat or use the little reaction things. Just always curious if this is the first time folks have heard about us. CJ, no need to apologize. There's no guilt. This isn't some sort of weird test. I'm just always curious if I'm connecting up with new folks or folks who are somewhat familiar with us. First time? Excellent. Great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just switch over to sharing my screen, and again, it's just a browser so I can kind of talk you through a bunch of resources. And then, yeah, you can ask some questions and I can dig deeper in on anything that's showing on the screen. And we'll just kind of go from there. So let me get this queued up. And then I'm going to make sure I can still see the chat for questions that are coming through. So I guess first thing, before I start talking, I just like to double check that people are actually seeing my slides. All right, looks like they're coming through, Meg. So what I have is honestly, for the most part, these are all free resources. These aren't paid. So if you click around on our website, right, like you'll see we are a membership organization, but membership means, you know, something different in that we don't use it as a way to sort of stage gate access to things like a number of associations and stuff do. It's really just a way to create connection with our community. So when I show you most of these resources, again, most of them are free. You don't even have to have an account or signed in. You can just jump in and take advantage. There are a couple that are paid, but I'm like sure I'll call them out. And then honestly, I have a little special deal to make some of the paid things actually free to you all because you showed up today. So there's like your special value add for being here at a live event. So one of the first things I want to highlight for folks is, and I'm going to drop it in the chat so there's a direct link. But on our website, under this Learn menu item, which is where you'll find most of these things I'm talking about, you'll see we have things, they're called resource hubs. And so one of those is focused on artificial intelligence. You'll see we have lots of other resource hubs and stuff as well. Kate, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, just excellent. All right. So if you jump into our AI resource hub, you're going to see we have a whole series of videos, right terms, AI governance, these quick videos that you can watch here. There's also a bunch of these resources that link off from each of those kind of mini topics. So the other thing to note is if you go through all these things, we do also have an easy path for you to request a certificate of completion. I know for folks that can be helpful to kind of demonstrate either to maybe your executive leadership, your board, or honestly, sometimes when people are applying for grants, they'll mention that like, hey, we've got these certificates as a way to demonstrate like we've been doing some learning around this. So you should trust that we're going to be good stewards with this grant and put it to like strategic use. Um, and so again, these are all here free. You don't have to be signed in. You don't have to kind of do anything other than kind of consume it. And again, as you'll see, a fair number of these tools, some of them are ours, and a good number of them are not. Again, because we are invested in just connecting people with good resources. And in no way do we sort of think or pretend like we're the only people that have resources. That would be absurd. And so, we're super happy to link out to other things that are, just valuable to folks. Another thing that we're really, honestly, we're pretty proud of and excited about, we put a lot of work into, is this AI for an Equitable World. It's basically this framework for governance that we created. And so you can access it from that resource page. I will also drop another link directly in here in case it's helpful for you to just like copy and paste some of these direct links out. So again, what's helpful here to note is that this isn't just some information we put together. So a lot of what we do at NTEN is we really try and be community driven. So this was actually community driven in that I believe it sort of fluctuated over time, but roughly between like 15 and 20 members from our community, sort of experts and practitioners, helped us come together to actually develop this framework and just again giving people sort of a strategic way to be able to approach this within their teams. And so if you want to, you'll be able to see right there's this PDF resource you can just download that can kind of give you lots of information, background, context. But then also, if just the diagram is helpful. So again, some resources to help you kind of think through yourself, but also I think even more importantly, sort of create some common language and some common sort of approaches if you're having these conversations within teams, within your leadership, with your board, or maybe you yourself are working with some community-driven committees and things like that. It can just kind of help set the guardrails because especially if you're trying to have a conversation about AI, right? Like it could mean 1,000 things. And so how do you make sure you're kind of getting everyone on the same page? And again, you're anchoring those conversations in the things that are important around things like equity, things about, ethical use of technology, which, to be honest, can be a little more challenging to find these days. You'll find plenty of information out there that's just like, you should be using all the AI all the time for all this stuff. And that's honestly, that's just not necessarily true. We want you to be strategic about not only how you use it, but we also want you to be intentional and strategic about the times when you maybe choose not to use it, because there are plenty of cases where maybe it doesn't make sense for you and your community. Maybe it doesn't make sense because of what your values are, and you want to be using tech that aligns with your values and supports your community. Um, so the other thing to note on this framework page, and a number of these are linked from the other ones, but it's just really worth highlighting that again, there are a stack of free resources here. So, generative AI use policy templates, just a general AI policy template, a planning worksheet. Like if you like the framework and now you want to actually go and be able to kind of move it into action, you can download a PDF template right here to kind of get you going and moving down that path. So again, there's a whole bunch of resources that are here that are free, have nothing to do with membership. You don't even have to give us your email address. There's no lead capture, any of that kind of stuff. It's just here free and open for you to connect with. In addition to a lot of our programs at NTEN, we also have a whole lot of community programming, which again is sort of community led and we support it. And so as part of that, we have a lot of community groups. So a bunch of them are in person. We have like in-person tech club groups that meet up. I think we're approaching 50 cities around the US where those in-person groups happen. But we also have online groups, which is great for folks who want to connect around topics, but maybe don't live near a larger city, like, a lot of you in Vermont, or like me in Southern Oregon, right? Like this is rural country. So I might not be able to go to a tech club in person. So we have a whole bunch of them that are actually just online, which means they're asynchronous. You can access whenever. You're getting access to people from all over the world, to be honest, not just in the US. Um, and so again, I just wanted to highlight, you can explore, you can dig in, but we do have one of those groups that's focused specifically on artificial intelligence. Again, I imagine you're interested in that, and that's why you're here. But I also imagine you have a lot of other things you're trying to do in your work and service of your community. So there are also groups for a lot of other stuff. So you can see there's some in-person ones, but there's other topics like cybersecurity, data, digital communication. So just again, being aware that there are these community resources for you to be able to tap into and connect with other folks. So that's a fair bit of me just yammering at you right out of the gate. So before I just kind of keep jumping in and hammering away and sharing out some resources, I do want to just stop for a second and see if anyone had any questions about those or in general before I kind of move into a couple of other things. And again, I'll share some resources, and then I definitely have a couple of like as we as an organization, NTEN, and me as an individual, like we think about AI use and those sorts of things, I'll kind of share out what are some of my kind of top considerations. Or again, if we get into it and if people are interested, like I'm happy to talk about some of the examples of how we use it and our thinking and thought process behind the decisions about all that, just to kind of know where we're going. But any questions or
Well,
anything
I
so
was going to
far?
say, I wonder if there, are questions that people came with today and sort of what brought you in. Is there something that, have you been having conversations with your board about using AI? Have you thought about using tools for in various ways? So, I mean, feel free to, if you have those questions, open up, or actually think that would be really helpful to hear. If not, what are the considerations? What should you be talking about with your board? Because I know it started with our organization with knowing that like, hey, this could really help us with some of our communications and things like that. And we really had a deep conversation, with staff and board about what are the ways we really thought about what AI tools we were going to use and where we were going to use them and how we to create a policy to communicate the use of those when using them in certain, whatever, if we're using them in communications, how do we make sure that we're clear about that? Things like that. So we were really looking to drill into how and when we might use AI and how it can be most useful. So we did some experimentation internally before we made a policy and moved forward. So I'm just curious if people are using AI tools or are curious, what tools you might be thinking about using.
Yeah, I'm super happy to kind of hear from folks again, sort of what brought you here.
You can feel free to put it in the chat, or if you have a question, or if that's like too big a topic to even touch. um,
General information.
right.
Cool.
And I'm just curious to throw it out there. Have people talked about AI use with their boards at all? TJ using it as grant writing for grant writing? Yeah, that's definitely a way, when you're having to bring together a lot of information and fit it into a strict format. I think AI can be helpful for that. Anyone else have any specific use cases or board members that have been going rogue with using AI? Seems like maybe not. Let's see, Kate is using AI smaller tasks like in press releases, social media ideas, comparing documents, but not sure how to lead a discussion on creating policy. Yeah, that's a great point. So the bigger question. So great. All right. Well, Ash, do you want to show us kind of keep on going, and feel free to put stuff in the chat. Yeah, thinking about policies. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I think what I'll do, I just have honestly like a few more resources. So I can get those shared out and then we can jump back in and we can just start like going down that list, right? Like we can talk about using it around great grant writing, grant management, right? There's the writing part and then there's the like, now you've got a grant managing it and then there's the reporting part. And then we can also talk about some of the policy stuff. Um, yeah, so in terms of N10, just two more resources to highlight here real quick. So everything I've shared so far was free, right? Access, you can get into it. We do have some additional paid stuff because we do have other elements in that we offer courses and professional certificates. So I'll drop again links here real quick to make it easy for folks to find. Um, but again, just noting that we have courses and those courses are self-paced. So the idea is you can kind of work on it at your own pace. There's no live component. We do have lots of courses. We're up to like 65 or so, but you can easily filter to look at things like artificial intelligence and you can see. So we definitely have kind of two paths that we're supporting content here. So some of it is AI for nonprofits, and then we do have some courses that are AI more geared towards foundational staff. Um, and so it's just kind of worth noting that they're both there, but they may also still apply. So even if you see one like this one, it's AI for foundations, but impact evaluation is also a thing that we all do at our nonprofits. So even if it has that tag, it could still be, pretty relevant for folks. And so one thing I'll say about those courses is that that is one of the paid opportunities, but I actually created a discount code. And so folks can use that discount code to actually take one of those courses for free. And so all you would have to do is just use that code at checkout. And so I'm just going to drop it here in the chat real quick. And then I'll share that through with you again, Meg. But it was trying to give like a little Easter egg for those who show up to the event. You can use that code. And so you can use it on an AI course, or to be honest, you could use it on any other course that's in our catalog. It doesn't really matter to me. I just wanted to give you all a chance to experience what those are like and see if it's kind of a good fit for how you learn. And then obviously for folks who maybe really want to go a little bit deeper, we do have professional certificates, and one of those is focused on AI for nonprofits. So um, that is kind of what I had specifically for N10. There's two other resources out there that I think are great. So I'm just going to share those real quick so people can know, because I think some of them definitely relate to kind of where we're getting at. And so this other one is this group called Meet the Moment. And they have this ridiculously robust resource hub. And it has tools around all kinds of stuff. So again, AI, security, operations. So one of the things here that I'm like a super fan of, and again, these are all free, open. You don't have to create an account, anything to get in here. But one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about and considering is what the environmental impact is. Is this little pop-up window, did that come through in the Zoom share? Okay. And so what I think is really helpful here is it helps you get an understanding of kind of how AI usage has very real environmental impact costs. And so this can kind of help you look at a number of different things. So one is just in general, if you had an activity, say a bus driving a mile, if I was using this particular model or tool, if I enter 20 queries into ChatGPT, that is the environmental equivalent of a bus driving a mile. So it's different for different models, which I think is also helpful to know because people often talk about how like, well, I like Gemini and I like Claude and I like whatever. And it may be because the user interface or because of their types of use. But I do think it's important to also think about that like some of these models are resources. And so again, if part of your organization's values or your personal values are really aligned along the environmental impact side of things, it's worth considering that as part of one of your choices for maybe why you use one model over another. So there's that. But another thing that I also really want to highlight for folks, especially since it seems like a lot of folks here kind of AI is new and maybe you're actually not using a lot of it. One of the things we're actually seeing happening more and more is that AI is also sneaking into your existing tools, right? So, like, you didn't ask for it, you didn't seek it out, and to be honest, you're not even using it. But now all of a sudden, AI lives inside your Microsoft products, it lives inside your Google products. And one thing that's worth noting is that in spaces where you are actually not using that AI feature, it's important to turn it off officially because essentially what's happening is it's like having a car that's running in your driveway, but you're not using it. And so there's still very real environmental impact costs from simply those tools being sort of activated and floating around in the back end of your systems. So if you're not using AI in certain tools in certain places, it's also worth taking the time to just go toggle those settings and turn those tools off so that it isn't having negative impacts when you're not even using it. And then so how to turn it off, CJ? It depends on your tool, but if you're using Microsoft 365, your admin can go into your general settings area and you can just sort of turn off different functional modules, right? So like if nobody's really using Copilot in your Microsoft services, right, then just toggle and turn those elements off. And then in the future, if you do want to use them, you can always come back and turn them on. It's not like you decide now forever. But again, there's no point in having those resources being consumed when you're not even using them. And to be honest, that's one of the most common things I find. Like I'll jump into one of our tools and I'll be like, what? Where's all this AI stuff now? And they just sort of quietly roll out features and they're turned on by default, but we don't want them there. So then we have to go and find them and turn them off. But and then again, here's just some nice comparison about, environmental impacts for certain uses, right? So generating an AI image is like one of the most resource intense things you can do. And so I just think about that, like if you need to do that action, is it worth is the benefit outweigh the costs? So it's just helpful to kind of have some of this information. So again, just one example of one of the tools in here, but one of the things that I think is actually really important because the environmental impacts of these are very real in terms of um, data centers are really kind of how this manifests in a lot of ways, right? Because their impact on local communities, and to be honest, data centers don't show up in the middle of cities, right? They tend to show up in rural communities. They tend to show up in marginalized communities. So these communities that have already been sort of othered or already honestly sort of harvested and taken advantage of, that's where the data centers are going. And so it's worth knowing how you connect your actions to that because it's like, well, we don't want a data center in our neighborhood. And it's like, well, then you should think about what the impact is if you're putting 100 prompts into an AI tool every single day. That's translating to processors and water consumption and all that stuff somewhere. So again, all the more reason to be intentional. I'm not saying don't ever use these tools, but like anything, right? Know that the reason you're doing it is intentional and that the benefits are aligned with the potential costs. And one other one, which is just really simple. I don't have to explain it too much. I'll just drop it in the chat. But there is this free AI fluency course that's out there. And I will acknowledge that, oops, that yes, this is provided by Anthropic, which is the company behind Claude. So they are a specific company, but this course is not about promoting their specific tool. And the content is actually super useful for you as an individual, but to like some of the comments here are like, how do I even just start having conversations with our team, whether it's about policy or it's just general usage? I think the content in this free course is just really helpful for that kind of stuff to understand how you want to approach it. Like, well, how do I know I can trust an AI tool? How do I know I can trust its responses? So they have this really simple exercise that helps you walk through what you can do in order to establish trust with the way you're using the tool. So it's not this approach where like, well, just trust it, because that's ridiculous. You shouldn't. But there are steps you can take to sort of build your skills in how you are using it to know that you're more and more making sure that you're getting the answers and the responses and outputs that you are expecting. So those are just some resources again that I think are really helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now so this can feel a little more human and you're not just staring at some promo slide from N10. But then again, just start jumping into some of the topics and questions people had and into whatever else people are looking for here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds great. So feel free, I mean, to if you have questions or things that you have come up that you're like, actually, I would love to know how to whatever. I know we mentioned grant writing, we talked about and grant management, right? Listen, like AI for writing grant reports could be your friend. Has become
Yeah.
my friend for that because things that don't take a lot of imagination to write, and are just trying to convey a lot of information or just think about that ways that you can use that or just, information gathering, information, analysis when you have a lot of spreadsheets, that you need to get information out of, things like that. So those are, I don't know if there's things that people have experimented with using specific to nonprofits. Grant reporting is something that we all have to do, grant management, things like that. Communications are something that people bring up a lot because there's a lot of repetitive actions, a lot of copy paste, minor edit,
Yeah.
things like that, that people may have been using AI. And then we talked about policy. Why have an AI policy, and what does that even look like, and how do you get started with that? So
Yeah.
we were laughing. We looked in our employee handbook, and we had some pretty old like internet usage policies
Yeah.
that were very fun to read about, whether or not you could be on the internet at work. And now we're like, okay,
Now
work
you're like, I
is
wish I could get off it.
yeah, work is being on the internet, right? But we literally had policies that had been written at a time when,
Yeah,
so we just sort of brought those up as like, here's
that's funny.
something from the employee handbook in the past. Anyway, just things like that
Yeah.
you might think about or discuss with your board.
Cool. Well, jumping into CJ, a specific example around grant writing. So again, those kind of three phases, right? So when it comes to actually writing the grant, writing the application, there's definitely some stuff there that I think can be helpful. There's a real basic entry level stuff, which is like the spell check aspect or the like updating the tone, like make this more professional, make this more right. So there's lots of AI stuff now that can kind of help adjust tone and that kind of stuff so that you're really framing it for your audience. All that's pretty basic, straightforward stuff in there. But what I think can be helpful is that the analysis which both can often happen when you do like outcomes reporting. But as we all know, that, wrapping up one grant leads into the next. And so, just an example from yesterday, right? So, we have all these application materials and we ask narrative questions. And it's great and it's really helpful when we're reviewing those applications. But an open narrative field for 100+ applicants, right? What's actually useful is what are the top 5 themes, right? So a good example there is using AI to do like summary to say, here's a huge chunk of data. Can you help me summarize it and kind of get it down to the essence, the insights? So that can be really helpful, right? So instead of just sharing these narrative responses for 100 different participants, I was able to be like, give me the top 5 themes and brief summary of each. And it was like, great, that is super helpful for our partners to see that kind of stuff. So, like, if you're writing for grants, if you've done any survey work to kind of do needs assessments or identify, like, this is what our community finds important and all that kind of stuff, it can be really helpful to be able to do that kind of stuff. Pull out my themes, pull out the highlights, um, and be able to get at that so that when you're submitting the grant, once you sort of into a grant or looking at impact evaluation, other things that can be helpful is saying, for example, like, well, here's our formal agreement. Here's the formal grant language, right? Like, can you help highlight and refine what might be appropriate KPIs for these requirements? Because a lot of times we'll kind of default to some standard things that we're measuring, but then sometimes it happens, right? And we get caught out and we're like, oh, we should have been asking that particular question and we didn't quite catch it. And now we have to ask host questions, but we didn't ask it up front. So being able to do that to kind of highlight like what would be sort of important metrics to be measuring if these are the goals we're trying to achieve or these are the requirements we're trying to meet. That's definitely something that I've seen, I've experienced using it for that kind of stuff. In general, general guidance around some AI stuff is there's a lot of honest noise that's out there right now that tells you that like let AI do the thinking for you. And to be honest, I think it's terrible advice. And if you look at it, that advice is largely coming from the tech companies themselves. So where I think AI can be really helpful and complementary to what you're doing is again, taking huge amounts of data. For me to come up with the 5 themes of that, like that's going to take me hours. But if I can get to that quickly, it's also a thing I can very quickly validate, right? So if I see these 5 themes, I can skim those results fairly quickly and just see like, yep, I see this is showing up low capacity, low capacity. Yep. Okay, this seems valid. I can validate the results, not just sort of just trust it out of the box, because honestly, you shouldn't just trust anything that gets spit out by AI. Um, so helping you do that kind of stuff, some analysis, maybe spotting sort of the gaps, right? Like what you know and what you understand is great, but having maybe something to say like, is there a metric I'm missing can be helpful, I think. And again, a way you can easily validate, right? Because if it suggests something, you as a human can use your reasoning and very quickly be like, that suggestion doesn't make sense. Or it's like, oh, great, it's something I missed. It totally lines up with what I see in the agreement, right? So again, I would take what you get out of AI as advice, right? You should always run it through your own filter, use your own criteria to evaluate before you kind of move forward with it. So those are some ways that I think it's been really, could be helpful. Highlighted in one of our courses is again, like how can you create sort of a scoring rubric? So again, like maybe you have people applying to programs, you're trying to figure out, okay, well, we need 3 different people to be evaluating. Maybe you do re-granting or something, right? So if we're gonna have 3 different people scoring applications, how can we come up with this rubric so that everyone is scoring in the same way? And there is consistency in our evaluation across multiple people. That's a great example. Great. Let some AI spin that up for you and help sort of frame that thinking, which again, you can quickly validate if it's accurate or useful or not. So there's some quick examples around grant writing and
Mhm.
management. And again, just like dipping our toes, but just some practical look at kind of how like impact evaluation stuff can be useful there. Um,
Um, Deb has a great question in the chat that a lot of people have liked talking about. So, how are nonprofits handling AI governance when you don't have enterprise licenses, right? And I think this probably comes up all the time. And so, if staff are using personal accounts and public tools, um, that is really a concern about data and things like that. So, that's really
yeah.
a great question.
Yeah, Deb,
Any
honestly,
thoughts?
one of the programs I run is this 3-month cybersecurity cohort. And so over the overlap between AI and data privacy and cybersecurity, like the overlap is getting immense, to be honest. And so you are absolutely on track being concerned about that because it's not just sort of theoretical, but there are more than a few examples of people doing things. Again, oftentimes it's called shadow tech is what I would call it, right? So it's not like an official tool for the organization, but you just have individuals who are like, oh, I just installed Claude on my desktop and now I'm going to use it. And it's like, you can't use Claude for your case notes, right? If you're a case manager, you can't include information. So, and I understand, like, honestly, not just some, a lot of organizations can't afford the enterprise level tools and things like that. And honestly, I don't think you have to have it. So in those cases where you can focus things around your AI use policy, which is something that, we actually use AI pretty minimally because we are very skeptical, and we're very slow and intentional around that particular tech. But one of the ways we approach it again is like, say, like, for example, that application materials. So rather than me just uploading a spreadsheet that has all of the information included in that application, what we do is we strip out every other bit of information from that sheet except for the question response columns. So we make sure there is nothing else in that data that I've shared that includes a name, an organization name, an email address. Like there is no identifying information. It's just words and narrative response. So sometimes what you can do, especially when you're not moving into enterprise tools where you have way more control, some really basic things that you can do with any of these tools you find is you can opt out of having your data shared to train their models. And so that's a setting everyone should find and get turned off immediately. And so that keeps at least your data from getting passed back into basically this like public space where all of a sudden the data could be pulled into someone else's responses. So turning that off, but then just having your policy not so much around like you can and can't use these tools, but more of those guardrails of saying like if this information is being shared with these tools, like you need to ensure that you have stripped out any identifying information, things like that, so that you are being compliant, with each state has its own data privacy rules, HIPAA compliance, all that kind of stuff. Um, but just around more of that, like how do you guide people to use it? So that can be easier than saying like, well, everybody has to use only this one tool. You can rather say, these are the guidelines so that if you are using whatever tool, you're at least using it in the same way to protect our community's data and privacy, and we're being good stewards and all that kind of stuff. Um, so does that
Do,
make sense, Deb?
And then I think there was a question in there, sort of like, is there a specific training that you might have that you could pinpoint on that, or is that just that we know where to find that, or is that do you think the Anthropic course that you recommended, did they address things like that, or
They
like
do
how
some of
drilled
that.
down,
They do
like how
some of
drilled
that.
down do you need to be?
Deb, if you send me an email directly, just and I'll put that in the chat, I can get a better sense of like specifically which of our AI courses might kind of dig in on that. I mean, we have some that talk about, bias and a number of them that talk about privacy. Um,
Mhm.
but I can try and figure out if there's one specifically that makes the most sense for that use case.
Yeah, that's great. I think privacy and data privacy is one of the concerns with, using it. especially if you're, for grant reporting, it's like you might be putting more information. Be careful about how much information you're putting in there, basically, if you don't have an
Yeah, I mean,
enterprise level system.
how much you're putting into the AI if you're using that as an assistant during that process. But in general, also right, like in some of our other courts, just in general, right, it's also helpful to also think about a lot of times nonprofits will give funders more information than they needed to in their grant reporting and their analysis and follow-up stuff anyways, right? Like if a funder is asking you, we want to see kind of the survey results and they want all of it, we strongly encourage people that like you should be entitled as stewards of that data to push back and say like, well, I think maybe you just need aggregate results. I don't think you need our community's names and email addresses and everything else we collected. So like encouraging and empowering people to be able to hold that line as data stewards. So yeah, both as you're putting it into AI tools, but around that grant management and reporting in general, organizations be like, oh, we did a feedback survey and here's the results. And I'll be like, what? You did not have to hand out people's name and email and home ad, whatever else you included. You don't have to give them IP addresses, um, because you've now shared data, but you have no idea how that other partner or funder is actually like managing security around it. So we're big fans of like only ever give out what is absolutely necessary to kind of meet the needs, and encourage people to go further on that.
Yeah, and I think just going back in the questions, Kate, thinking about you mentioned about like how policy, like how do you lead a discussion on creating policy? And I think those are some of the issues that really you can discuss with your, your board, your staff. It's like maybe start the conversation by saying, how are we using AI, right? How are people using AI? And when we're doing it, what do we need to be mindful of? So where you let the policy be driven by kind of the ways in which you're using it. Does that make sense? Would that be
Yeah.
a good way to say? So start by maybe having a conversation with your board about, are you using AI and are people using their personal AI, assistants on, organizational, work, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but just sort of like, should we have a policy around this? If we're doing it, maybe, and then just open that's a good way into that conversation with your staff and with the board and say, how do we want to handle this? And so how are
Yeah.
we using it? What are the dangers? And I think that's where, maybe some of these tools can help you get a sense of why would we need a policy? And maybe, you can look at a model policy and say, do we need everything that's in this, and see what people have included. But I think it's like just a great conversation to open with people and sort of say, are we using AI without even knowing
Yeah.
it? Or are we intentionally using AI, but maybe not doing it as intentionally as we could be? So
Yeah,
good
I think
conversation.
a great place to start is a staff inventory is often kind of the term that gets used. But again, it's just understanding what are the tools people are using and then why are they using that? Because what's really helpful, because sometimes people will be like, we need a policy, and then they just throw out a policy, but that policy can tend to come from a not quite punitive, but it's more of this restrictive standpoint, right? Where it's like, well, we need a policy that tells people what they shouldn't be doing. And you're like, well, people do things because they're trying to get needs met. So if you aren't designing policies that are also supporting them getting their needs met, honestly, people just aren't going to follow it. And so doing that staff inventory for a lot of reasons, right? We just need to know what systems our data is interacting with. Um, so you get a sense of what tools are being used and why, and then it gives you a place to think about, okay, well, maybe our AI use policy needs to consider these things. It needs to say, well, what are the things we need as safeguards, but also what are the ways we can set people up to be successfully getting their needs met. Um, and I'll say it because it is amazing how much it gets missed. But like if you're doing a staff inventory, you're checking in, it's extremely important that there is no shame, there is no judgment. This is not a way that you're supposed to be catching people out. The idea is like we just need to understand our reality and be able to strategically support everybody. And so if you find out people are doing things or someone have mistakenly been putting information into tools that they shouldn't have, that's not a time to come back and be like, Ash, what are you doing? It's say, Ash, I totally understand what you're trying to achieve. Let's figure out a way that we can achieve that, but just in a way that's more mindful of security, privacy, that kind of stuff. Um, so I think that could be really, it's helpful for so many reasons. to be doing like that staff survey. But in the context of AI, it can help you understand where you just start around developing new policies. It's like, well, if most people are using it for this particular reason, then let's start with the policy that tries to address the biggest, highest priority need, and then we can grow and refine it from there. But it helps you prioritize because we don't have enough time to do all the things. And so, how can we know which is kind of the most meaningful thing to be putting energy into first so we can make progress and kind of go from there?
I
Um,
think at this point we're getting close to the end of our time that we've sort of allotted. So people are welcome to, we usually say 45 minutes or so. So, but if people
we
have
do.
other questions, please keep it going. You're welcome to throw those out there. I mean, and Ash, I think you've
I
given us a lot
do.
of places to start. Yeah.
And I have one more point I wanted to make that definitely matches up with what CJ just put in the chat here. But one of the things to also think about too is that as there's honestly every single day, there's more and more AI driven tools. I'm also seeing an increase in what I call local versus cloud based. And so to CJ's point, right, of like people using dictation tools, right? So this is speech to text. I just talk, it just translates it into text. So here's a great use case in lots of ways. So there are a lot of these tools that you can use now, and they're cloud-based. So that means every single time I use it, it's making a call to those servers. It's needing processors from data centers. But to be honest, there's a number of tools that are now coming out that are AI driven, but essentially it's like a piece of software that lives just on your machine, right? So the AI, everything about it lives on your machine. So you get the benefits, but honestly, when I use the tool, it is not accessing anything outside of my machine. So I'm not relying on those servers. I'm not putting calls to data centers. Privacy is absolutely locked in at my machine. And so I definitely encourage people to think about this because there's a lot of these little tools. Again, speech to text is great because it seems small. How can this possibly have a big impact? But again, nine prompts in a chat is the equivalent to watching Netflix for an hour. So just imagine every single time I start and stop my speech to text, that's considered a call. So I can rack up basically the equivalent of watching like 10 Netflix movies in a day, like easily, right? But I found tools that just live on my machine. So the environmental impact is now like nullified. And so that also works because there's other tools that basically function like ChatGPT and all that, but you can actually just have it on your machine. So if you're on a Mac, there's one app that's just called Locally, Locally. Sorry, I don't have a link to it. But basically, like it allows me to have all the function of a chat bot and it can pull in current models and it can do all this kind of stuff. And again, 100% just lives on my machine. So data privacy, security, data ownership, the environmental thing, like all of those things get mitigated, but I still get the benefits of interacting with a chatbot to tell me, like, can you give me the top 5 themes from this survey result data? And so definitely want to encourage folks. And if you do have questions or you want examples, because trust me, I got tools for days. You can always just send me an email directly. Um, but there is some really cool and really impressive AI technology that's coming out now, and a number of it is like free and open source that just lives on your machine. So really want to encourage people to kind of think about or explore that because I think that small difference alone helps mitigate so many of the risks and the potential downsides of AI that you just don't even know are happening in the background, right? So again, I want to hold a little space for anybody who maybe has some other questions or comments or like I said, this is just a high level, just kind of dipping into it. Obviously, we can go deeper. I can talk tools, strategy, all kinds of stuff. But obviously, just trying to give people a real kind of high level intro to some resources that exist and some things to think about and consider. More than any other tech, the environmental impact is so significant for AI use. And again, the communities that are going to have to deal with that impact are rural and marginalized ones. And so it's, I think, important for people to be informed and to make decisions based around that, especially when there are options, right? There are options that can align with our values and options that cannot. And it's hard to discern that because so much noise is coming from big tech. And in general, everyone wants to be seen as like being on the cutting edge of AI. And again, it's as long as you have a use, like you should never be using a tool unless you know exactly how it's there to serve you and your mission and your purposes. So validate, like, don't feel like you have to use AI because the world says you have to use AI. That's a terrible reason to use a tool.
Go ahead with your question.
Hi,
I,
yes. I wanted to ask more specifically since you guys do a lot of work with equity.
Yeah,
And I know AI, we've talked about summarization as one of the leading ways that people are using it, and it saves a lot of time and energy for like small nonprofits. But I'm kind of curious to know your thoughts on if there are ways where not necessarily training an AI platform, but like how do you maintain like a sense of just like making sure that like when these tools are being used to summarize that there's still that level of making sure that equity is considered and that like the perspective that the platform or the chat bot is like giving you still can kind of include, a lot of those marginalized communities that you are talking about and um,
yeah,
yeah, how do you like, I guess, push back on like if AI gathers a lot of the mainstream voice, how do you
yeah.
kind of get it to include a lot of these communities that are left out?
Yeah, how do we avoid just echoing and amplifying systems of oppression? Because
Yeah.
that's what mostly is living in the data source for the internet at large. There's a couple of things. So there's one tool, Google Notebook LM, and that's one of the ones that I use in support of our programs. And one of the things I like about that one in particular is that you identify the sources of information. So it is not pulling out from the general internet. So like if I want to do something for our programs or do summary of whatever, like I load in the information that it then uses as a reference to then do anything else. So there's one thing that I like that really allows me to say like I know this isn't being based on a bunch of other outside information. And that doesn't always sort of fit every use case. But there are a shocking amount of use cases where, again, that just makes sense. Like I can put in the grant application, I can put in our program descriptions, I can put in our equity statement, I can put in all those things. And then that's what gets used as the context to do everything else in my conversation there. Another example that does fit along with tools like Claude or ChatGPT or Locally, which is doing the same thing, a chatbot thing, right? So a lot of times in the chat history, it will base it on previous interactions and things like that. So another example is I used one recently and it created this table for me that compared like what happens if you're doing this without this policy in place and what's it look like if you're doing it with it. Basically, whatever, it produced something for me and it had some ableist language in it. And so I gave it the prompt to say, please rewrite this and avoid using ableist language like blind and blind spots and things like that. And so then it then takes that and is like, oh, understand. And it came back and it rewrote it for me and it stripped out the ableist language. So now going forward in that same chat thread, at least, it will keep that in mind that I am trying to avoid ableist language. I'm trying to avoid, and you can give it some examples. So more and more tools like Claude is another one where they have a project space. And so what it means is you can have multiple chats, but you can actually load in reference materials so that any interaction is then pulling back and using those references and those source materials to guide what you're doing. So again, a spot where like you can drop in an equity guide, you can drop in a PDF that talks about like, microaggressions and all those things you want to kind of counter. You can have those in as kind of reference points, and that can help say like, hey, I know you're loaded with some bias here, but like let's correct that as part of our interactions. Um, so there's again just some quick practical examples of how you can kind of do it, and all the more reason again to like have a human involved in the process. So a human can always have that double check and use human reasoning to say like, wait a second. You know what I mean? Like I saw it and I was like, ugh, I don't want this language in here. And so it's a helper, but you should never just have one of these tools like just functioning for you, and then just copy and paste and use it somewhere, right? So hopefully that helps. At least some quick, simple tips on how to sort of counteract the bias that can absolutely and does live in these systems.
That's a great tip, actually, and just kind of uploading some policies and language. So thank you so much, to keep that in your space as you're working. And we always say the same thing too, is that we, kind of just like evaluate,
Yeah.
evaluate and edit and learn how to give better prompts as you go. Deb, question. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for this. I've really enjoyed this conversation today. Um, Not so much a question, but things that I talk about when I am asked to speak on AI and how to use tools is one, to think of AI like an intern or a research assistant
Yeah.
where you trust but verify. And then the other thing I like to say as a Harry Potter fan is to quote, who is it, Ron Weasley's dad when he's speaking to someone about the Voldemort diary, but never trust anything that thinks for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain. So
Yeah.
to approach AI with those skepticisms, I think has served me well.
Yeah. It's an advice tool. That's the way I think of it. It's advice. And then I'll determine what I can verify, what I can validate, what parts are useful. And like all advice, some of it is just like, cool, cool. Yeah, I'm not going to do anything with that. That doesn't make any sense, but thanks. Thanks for the advice. Well, I know Deb or Meg, you probably have a couple of
Yeah.
quick announcements. I definitely want to thank everyone for sharing your time with me today. Like, I know it's the most limited thing you have, so genuinely appreciate you letting me join your event and connect with you all in your community. So, thank you for, yeah, just sharing some time with me today.
And thank you. Pods on cue are dying. So we'll go to the other audio. So thank you. And Ash, we really appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge with us. And everyone here, I will share out all the links, including that discount code that will let you sample a course, and just encourage you to kind of go play around with it and just open. The idea today was just to open a good conversation with your
Yeah.
board. And your usage, and just for yourself and your organization, on how to use these tools. So I don't have much to say, except that if you haven't heard, we have a big conference happening next week, the Southern Vermont Economy Summit. It's next Tuesday at Mount Snow. So still taking registrations. We're expecting 300 plus people there, for a lot of really great conversations, including one about AI, but on a lot of other topics as well, and a lot of kind of learning workshops and big picture thinking and workshops on all kinds of things. So feel free to tune in for that and check that out. Otherwise, if you're not on the BDCC newsletter, you can email me and I'll get you on there, and you'll hear about the events that we have. We send it out every 2 weeks like clockwork, so you can find out what events we have coming up. But thank you so much to everyone. I think my next big nonprofit event is now going to be planned for September. We're going to do a financial strategies for strong nonprofits workshop. It's in development. It's really exciting. And we'll do that it's like September for an in-person event. So you have plenty of time. So thanks everyone. And we'll share the recording
Thanks, everyone.
and the links.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you so much.